The family unit is traditionally the foundational site of human attachment, but under specific pathological conditions, this structure transforms into a coercive, high-control system that mirrors the psychological architecture of a cult. This comparison matrix highlights the deviation from healthy systemic functioning. While functional families maintain permeable boundaries and support an autonomous self, high-control systems prioritize a monolithic collective identity and rigid, absolute narrative control. These systems rely on a defining paradox. They project absolute external unity to the outside world to mask severe internal conflict and identity fragmentation. The environment operates as a self-regulating architecture, utilizing enmeshment, bounded choice, and epistemic invalidation to preserve a curated public image. For behavioral researchers, recognizing this architecture shifts the focus from individual psychopathology to the diagnosis of a closed, cult-like microstate. We can map the topography of a functional family. Each member exists as a distinct node, separated by clear but permeable borders. In high-control systems, these internal borders dissolve into enmeshment. Individual privacy is sacrificed to create a monolithic collective identity. Simultaneously, the system hardens its exterior. This rigid perimeter blocks external reality checks and prevents any exposure of internal vulnerability to the outside world. This lack of differentiation creates chronic threat sensitivity. When the group's alignment is pressured, the system reacts with intense anxiety. To manage this anxiety, the system employs triangulation. A stressed dyad recruits a third family member to stabilize their own tension, converting diffuse anxiety into a rigid, patterned relationship. The family authority weaponizes these triangles to create covert alliances and a system of internal surveillance. Siblings are often conditioned to monitor and report on each other to maintain the group's purity. These three elements, enmeshment, rigid external boundaries, and chronic triangulation, form the structural container that allows coercive control to operate without external interference. Robert J. Lifton's 8 criteria of thought reform, though designed for political totalism, provide a precise map for these domestic environments. Families achieve milieu control by regulating external communication, tracking locations, and strictly filtering digital access to ensure only the approved family interpretation of reality counts. Through sacred science and the dispensing of existence, the family's worldview becomes unquestionable truth. Belonging is no longer a right of birth. It is a conditional status granted only to those who submit to the narrative. Outsiders often wonder why victims don't simply leave. Sociologist Janja Lalich's framework of bounded choice explains why staying is often a rational decision. Choices still exist, but they occur within a field severely narrowed by financial dependency, fear, and the threat of total social annihilation. Compliance is a logical adaptation to a field where all other exits have been forcibly closed. This framework clarifies that the victim's submission is a survival response to extreme, artificially created constraints. When an internal truth-teller threatens the family's curated image, the system activates specific regulatory mechanisms to restore homeostasis. Within the clinical framework of prediction error minimization, gaslighting is a failure to resolve discrepancies between expectation and reality. When a parent denies a known event, the child faces two paths: question the authority or question themselves. Because the child has high epistemic trust in the caregiver, they resolve the error by downweighting their own perceptions. They doubt their own rationality to preserve the attachment. If invalidating the individual's reality fails to silence them, the system escalates to a coordinated smear campaign. This causal chain illustrates the mechanics of scapegoating. Moral disengagement allows the group to justify cruelty by recoding the dissenter as the problem, thereby protecting the family's shared identity. The smear campaign is a vital homeostasis loop. It sacrifices one member to restabilize the group's preferred story about itself. This system extracts a profound psychological toll from every member, including those who remain compliant. Survival requires a double life. Members must project outward composure and loyalty while privately managing fear and resentment. We can map this clinically using self-discrepancy theory. The ought self, who one must be to remain acceptable, is completely misaligned with the actual self. The individual must continuously subordinate their actual experience to the monolithic demands of the family's public image, leading to chronic anxiety and shame. According to cognitive dissonance theory, this tension is managed through internal distortion. To tolerate the split, members reinterpret the harm they see, often convincing themselves that the system's cruelty is actually a form of protection. This identity fragmentation is a structural requirement of the system. In these environments, the authentic self is routinely punished, and the false self becomes the only means of survival. These pathological patterns self-replicate as the system assigns recurring roles like the enforcer, the golden child, and the scapegoat to the next generation. Trauma transmission is primarily relational and embodied. It takes root through attachment patterns and caregiving styles, often persisting without the need for explicit storytelling or shared memories. The strongest empirical evidence highlights behavioral modeling and attachment disruption. Unresolved trauma in a caregiver alters their sensitivity, forcing the child to adapt through survival strategies that later organize their own adult relationships. Emerging research also identifies biological markers, such as altered amygdala structures and compromised oxytocin levels, as contributing factors to this intergenerational cycle. Despite its rigidity, the system is vulnerable. A breach of secrecy or the total defection of a member can trigger a structural collapse of the family myth. Recovery demands the psychological dismantling of internalized mechanisms, like moral disengagement, while slowly restoring the patient's epistemic trust. This process often involves a mythical rebirth of the self. As the false existence is exposed, the individual must unify their repressed authentic self with their lived reality. True healing is the reclamation of an integrated identity, finally free from the boundaries of the totalitarian hearth.